History rarely announces itself when it enters a human life. It arrives quietly, through uniforms folded at the foot of a bed, through laws written in distant offices, through rumors whispered in streets that suddenly feel unfamiliar. In the Europe of the 1930s and 1940s, history did not knock, it consumed. It turned neighbors into strangers, professions into weapons, and ordinary days into moral crossroads. Long after the gunfire faded and the camps were liberated, its echoes continued to live inside those who survived, and those who participated. This documentary begins not with a meeting, but with distance. Two lives, born into the same continent, shaped by the same war, yet pulled to opposite ends of human experience. One would wear the insignia of the Nazi state, absorbed into a vast machinery that demanded obedience and offered belonging. The other would be marked for erasure, reduced to a number, and forced to endure a system designed to extinguish identity itself. For decades, these two lives would exist separately, bound by a shared history they could neither escape nor fully confront. The Holocaust did not emerge overnight. It was constructed step by step, policy by policy, normalization by normalization. Anti-Semitism, once a social prejudice, became law. Law became exclusion. Exclusion became deportation. Deportation became industrialized murder. 6 million Jews were killed, along with millions of others deemed undesirable by the Nazi regime. The scale was unprecedented, but the perpetrators were often painfully ordinary: clerks, guards, drivers, men who once had families, routines, and futures that seemed unremarkable. For the former Nazi, youth unfolded during a time of national humiliation and economic collapse. Germany promised restoration, pride, and order. The regime offered clarity in a world of chaos, answers where uncertainty had lived. Indoctrination began early, reinforced through schools, rallies, and the seductive language of unity and duty. Participation did not always feel like a choice. It felt like the current of history itself, pulling relentlessly forward. Years later, memory would blur intention and responsibility, but the weight of involvement would remain. For the Holocaust survivor, childhood was interrupted by the slow tightening of a noose. Friends disappeared. Shops closed. Rights dissolved. Eventually, there was the knock at the door, the forced departure, the cattle car, the camp. Survival became an act stripped of heroism, measured in hunger endured, humiliation swallowed, and moments of luck amid systematic cruelty. The survivor would carry not only personal loss, but the absence of entire worlds, families, communities, languages, traditions erased within a few years. Time moved on, as it always does. Europe rebuilt itself. Borders changed. New generations were born. Yet for those who lived through the Holocaust from either side of the barbed wire, the past did not stay in the past. It resurfaced in dreams, in silences at dinner tables, in unanswered questions asked by children and grandchildren. Guilt and grief traveled different paths, but neither fully dissolved. This is not a story of easy binaries. It is not about monsters and saints. It is about human beings placed inside an inhuman system, and the consequences that followed them for the rest of their lives. The meeting that will eventually occur between a former Nazi and a Holocaust survivor is not a gesture of reconciliation, nor a spectacle of forgiveness. It is an encounter with memory itself, a confrontation between lived trauma and lived responsibility. Before that moment can exist, we must understand the distance that separates them. The decades of silence. The social mechanisms that allowed genocide to unfold. The personal narratives that shaped how each individual understood their own role in history. This first chapter lays the foundation, reminding us that the Holocaust is not only a historical event, but a human one, carried in bodies, voices, and unresolved questions that persist long after the last witnesses begin to fade. History does not end when wars do. It waits. And sometimes, it brings two lives together, not to heal the past, but to force it into the light. Genocide is never carried out by ideology alone. It requires systems, routines, and people willing to participate, sometimes eagerly. sometimes
यार
passively,
अबे ना जो
often
दोनों का
without
इंटर
fully
बैकग्राउंड
confronting
लिखा
the
है हाँ वो एक
consequences
एक
of
का
their
इंटर लिखा कर
actions.
दो
Nazi Germany
यार
perfected this
अबे ना जो
machinery.
दोनों का इंटर बैकग्राउंड
It
लिखा है हाँ वो
transformed
एक एक
belief
का
into
इंटर लिखा कर
bureaucracy,
दो
hatred into policy, and
यार अबे ना
obedience
जो
into a
दोनों का
moral
इंटर
anesthetic.
बैकग्राउंड लिखा है हाँ वो एक एक का
Within
इंटर
this
लिखा कर
system,
दो
millions of ordinary men became
यार अबे ना
indispensable
जो दोनों
components
का
of an
इंटर बैकग्राउंड
unprecedented
लिखा है हाँ
crime.
वो एक एक का इंटर लिखा
The
कर
former
दो
Nazi did not begin his life with
यार
visions of
अबे ना
mass
जो
murder.
दोनों का इंटर बैकग्राउंड
He
लिखा है
grew
हाँ
up
वो
amid
एक एक का इंटर
instability,
लिखा कर दो
economic despair, and national
यार अबे
humiliation
ना जो
following
दोनों का
World
इंटर
War I.
बैकग्राउंड लिखा है
Germany's
हाँ वो
collapse
एक एक का
created
इंटर
a
लिखा कर
vacuum,
दो
one filled by promises of order,
यार अबे ना
unity,
जो
and
दोनों का
restored
इंटर
pride.
बैकग्राउंड लिखा है हाँ वो एक
The
एक का
Nazi
इंटर
Party
लिखा कर
offered
दो
identity in place of uncertainty.
यार अबे ना जो दोनों का इंटर
Through
बैकग्राउंड
rallies,
लिखा है हाँ वो
symbols,
एक
and
एक का
relentless
इंटर लिखा कर
propaganda,
दो
it rewired how individuals
यार
understood
अबे ना
duty,
जो दोनों का इंटर
loyalty,
बैकग्राउंड
and
लिखा है हाँ
belonging.
वो एक एक का इंटर
The
लिखा कर
state did
दो
not merely govern, it shaped
यार
reality.
अबे ना जो दोनों का इंटर
Training
बैकग्राउंड
and
लिखा है हाँ वो
indoctrination
एक एक का
worked
इंटर
hand in
लिखा
hand.
कर दो
From youth organizations
यार
to
अबे ना जो
military
दोनों का
structures,
इंटर
moral
बैकग्राउंड लिखा है हाँ
complexity
वो
was
एक एक
stripped
का
away.
इंटर लिखा कर दो
Orders were simplified.
यार अबे ना जो
Enemies
दोनों
were
का इंटर बैकग्राउंड
dehumanized.
लिखा है हाँ वो एक एक का इंटर
Language
लिखा कर
itself became
दो
a weapon. People were no longer
यार
people,
अबे ना जो
but
दोनों का इंटर
elements,
बैकग्राउंड
threats,
लिखा है हाँ
or
वो एक एक का
cargo.
इंटर लिखा कर दो
By the time many men put on a
यार
uniform,
अबे ना
they
जो
were not
दोनों का
asked
इंटर
to question
बैकग्राउंड
right
लिखा है
and
हाँ
wrong.
वो एक एक का इंटर लिखा
They
कर
were
दो
asked only to function.
यार
The
अबे
Nazi
ना जो
system
दोनों का इंटर
thrived on
बैकग्राउंड लिखा है
fragmentation
हाँ
of
वो एक एक का इंटर
responsibility.
लिखा कर दो
One man guarded a gate.
यार अबे ना जो दोनों का
Another
इंटर
drove a
बैकग्राउंड
train.
लिखा है हाँ वो एक एक का
Another
इंटर लिखा
filed
कर दो
Rarely did
यार अबे ना
individuals
जो
see the
दोनों
full
का इंटर
picture,
बैकग्राउंड
and
लिखा
when
है
they
हाँ
did,
वो एक
the
एक का इंटर
system
लिखा कर
provided
दो
excuses ready-made, necessity,
यार अबे ना जो दोनों का इंटर
patriotism,
बैकग्राउंड लिखा है हाँ वो एक एक
obedience
का इंटर
became a
लिखा कर
shield
दो
against conscience.
यार अबे ना जो दोनों का इंटर
Meanwhile,
बैकग्राउंड
carried
लिखा है
real
हाँ वो एक एक का
consequences,
इंटर लिखा कर दो
punishment, imprisonment, even death.
यार अबे ना जो दोनों का
Within
इंटर
this structure,
बैकग्राउंड लिखा है
moral
हाँ वो
choice
एक एक का
narrowed
इंटर
until
लिखा
it
कर
felt
दो
non-existent. For
यार
the
अबे
former
ना जो
Nazi,
दोनों का इंटर
memory of
बैकग्राउंड
those
लिखा है
years is
हाँ वो
marked
एक
by
एक का इंटर लिखा
contradiction.
कर दो
There are moments of pride and
यार
efficiency,
अबे ना जो दोनों का
discipline,
इंटर
and
बैकग्राउंड लिखा है हाँ वो
camaraderie,
एक एक
feelings
का इंटर लिखा
cultivated
कर
deliberately
दो
by the regime.
यार
And there
अबे
are
ना जो
moments of
दोनों का इंटर
unease,
बैकग्राउंड लिखा
glimpses
है
of
हाँ वो
suffering
एक
that
एक
did
का
not
इंटर
fit
लिखा
the
कर
official
दो
narrative, sites quickly buried
यार
under
अबे ना जो
routine and
दोनों का
denial.
इंटर बैकग्राउंड लिखा है
The
हाँ वो
passage
एक
of
एक का
time
इंटर
has
लिखा
not
कर
erased
दो
these memories, it has complicated
यार
them.
अबे ना जो दोनों का इंटर
Reflection
बैकग्राउंड लिखा
arrives
है हाँ वो
late,
एक
but
एक
it
का इंटर
arrives
लिखा कर
nonetheless.
दो
Historians have
यार
long
अबे ना जो
struggled with
दोनों
an
का इंटर
unsettling
बैकग्राउंड
truth.
लिखा है हाँ वो एक एक
Extraordinary
का इंटर
evil
लिखा
does
कर
not
दो
require extraordinary people.
यार अबे
It
ना जो दोनों
requires
का इंटर
ordinary
बैकग्राउंड
people who
लिखा है
stop
हाँ वो
seeing
एक एक का
others as
इंटर लिखा
human.
कर दो
The Nazi regime
यार
understood this
अबे ना जो
deeply.
दोनों का इंटर
By
बैकग्राउंड लिखा है हाँ
controlling
वो एक एक का
information,
इंटर लिखा
rewarding
कर दो
conformity, and punishing doubt,
यार
it
अबे ना
engineered
जो दोनों का इंटर
participation on a
बैकग्राउंड
massive
लिखा है हाँ
scale.
वो एक एक का इंटर लिखा कर दो
Responsibility became diffused, and
यार
guilt
अबे
became
ना जो
easier
दोनों
to
का इंटर
deny.
बैकग्राउंड लिखा है हाँ वो
After
एक
the
एक का
war,
इंटर लिखा
many
कर
former
दो
Nazis returned to civilian life.
यार अबे ना जो दोनों का
Some were
इंटर बैकग्राउंड
prosecuted,
लिखा है हाँ
most
वो
were
एक एक का
not.
इंटर लिखा कर दो
Societies eager to rebuild
यार
often
अबे
chose
ना जो
silence
दोनों का
over
इंटर बैकग्राउंड
confrontation.
लिखा है हाँ वो एक एक का
This
इंटर लिखा
silence
कर
allowed
दो
personal narratives to harden,
यार
stories
अबे
of
ना जो
coercion,
दोनों का इंटर बैकग्राउंड
ignorance,
लिखा
or
है हाँ वो एक
inevitability.
एक का इंटर लिखा कर दो
Yet beneath these narratives lay an
यार
unresolved
अबे ना जो
tension,
दोनों
the
का इंटर
knowledge that
बैकग्राउंड लिखा है हाँ
participation,
वो एक एक का
even
इंटर
without
लिखा कर दो
enthusiasm, still enabled atrocity.
यार अबे ना जो दोनों
This
का
part
इंटर
of the
बैकग्राउंड
story
लिखा
is
है हाँ वो
uncomfortable
एक
by
एक का इंटर लिखा
necessity.
कर दो
To understand the Holocaust
यार
fully,
अबे ना जो
one must
दोनों का इंटर
examine not
बैकग्राउंड
only
लिखा है
victims
हाँ
and
वो एक एक का
survivors,
इंटर लिखा
but
कर दो
perpetrators and enablers.
यार अबे
Not
ना
to
जो दोनों
excuse
का
them,
इंटर
but
बैकग्राउंड
to
लिखा है हाँ
understand
वो
how
एक
such
एक
a
का इंटर
system
लिखा
could
कर
exist at
दो
all. The former
यार
Nazis'
अबे ना जो
reflections
दोनों का
force
इंटर
us to
बैकग्राउंड
confront a
लिखा है हाँ
haunting
वो
question.
एक एक का इंटर
Under
लिखा कर
similar
दो
conditions, how many others might have done
यार
the
अबे
same?
ना जो दोनों का इंटर
The
बैकग्राउंड
machinery
लिखा
of
है हाँ वो
obedience
एक एक
did
का
not
इंटर लिखा
disappear
कर
in
दो
1945.
यार
Its
अबे ना
lessons
जो दोनों का
remain,
इंटर
embedded
बैकग्राउंड
in
लिखा है
modern
हाँ वो
systems
एक
that
एक का
value
इंटर लिखा कर
efficiency
दो
over ethics and compliance over
यार
conscience.
अबे ना जो दोनों का
By
इंटर बैकग्राउंड
examining
लिखा
how
है हाँ वो
ordinary
एक
men
एक का
became
इंटर लिखा कर
Nazis,
दो
we are reminded that the greatest danger
यार
lies
अबे
not
ना जो
only in
दोनों का
hatred,
इंटर
but
बैकग्राउंड
in
लिखा है हाँ
silence,
वो एक एक का
routine,
इंटर लिखा
and the
कर दो
surrender of moral responsibility. The Holocaust survivor's story is not told in grand gestures or heroic exploits. It is told in the quiet, almost invisible acts of survival, waking in the cold before dawn, sharing a scrap of bread, finding a momentary shield against despair. Every day was measured in hours and decisions, what to endure, what to ignore, what to hope for. Life inside the camps was a world turned upside down, where morality, kinship, and human instinct were stretched to breaking points. Arrival at the camps was a brutal initiation. Trains arrived like mechanical beasts, disgorging thousands of people into a system designed to strip them of identity. Families were separated in seconds, belongings confiscated, names replaced with numbers sewn onto clothing. The air was thick with smoke, fear, and the faint scent of disinfectant meant to sanitize the machinery of murder. Those first moments established a rhythm of terror, a constant awareness of mortality that never truly faded. Daily life was a relentless struggle. Work was designed to exhaust and humiliate. Barracks were overcrowded, cold, and unsanitary. Hunger gnawed at bones, disease lurked in every corner. Yet, even amid despair, small acts of resilience emerged. Survivors would share stories quietly, protect each other when possible, or remember songs and prayers from a life before. These fragile acts were lifelines, threads of humanity resisting systematic erasure. The psychological toll was profound. Fear, shame, and grief became companions, but so did the determination to endure. The survivor learned to navigate the shifting dynamics of guards, capos, and fellow prisoners. Every interaction carried consequences, every gesture could be misinterpreted. Trust became a rare currency, and suspicion a necessary shield. In these moments, survival was not merely physical, it was moral, emotional, and spiritual. Yet, the camp also revealed the extraordinary capacity for courage in unimaginable circumstances. Children protected one another when adults could not. Prisoners risked death to share food, medicine, or comfort. Secret acts of resistance, memorizing names, recording events, hiding possessions, were testimonies to the human spirit refusing total annihilation. These small defiance gestures were acts of memory, ensuring that even in the face of erasure, life and dignity persisted. Liberation did not erase trauma. The survivor emerged into a world of ruins, both literal and symbolic. Cities lay in rubble, and families, communities, and nations were irrevocably fractured. Yet, survival was not simply the absence of death. It carried the weight of witness, the responsibility to remember, to testify, and to prevent the past from fading into abstraction. Memories, both vivid and haunting, became a moral obligation, a silent but relentless duty to those who could not speak for themselves. Decades later, the survivor's recollection is marked by both pain and clarity. The smallest details, the sound of boots on wooden floors, the hum of a train at night, the smell of smoke and iron, remain etched in memory. Each recollection is an act of defiance against forgetting, a refusal to allow history to be sanitized or ignored. These memories are not only personal, they are universal, speaking to the capacity for resilience and the consequences of human cruelty. This part of the documentary does not dwell in sensationalism, nor does it seek to dramatize suffering for effect. Instead, it immerses viewers in the relentless, quiet reality of survival, a life lived against erasure, where each day was both a victory and a reminder of profound loss. The survivor's story sets the stage for the eventual encounter with the former Nazi, a meeting where decades of memory, trauma, and human complexity will converge. After decades of silence, the moment finally arrives. Two lives, shaped by the same history yet divided by opposing roles, come face to face. One carries the weight of participation, a conscience heavy with the deeds committed and the obedience rendered. The other carries the weight of survival, of memory, grief, and the enduring question of justice. The air between them is dense with unspoken words, a charged stillness that seems to suspend time itself. The encounter does not begin with reconciliation. It begins with hesitation. Eyes meet, scanning for signs, fear, remorse, anger, recognition. Both understand that no apology can fully repair what was broken, no explanation can encompass the enormity of suffering, and no narrative can fully contain the years of silence. Yet, the act of facing one another is itself monumental, a confrontation between memory and responsibility, between what was endured and what was done. The former Nazi speaks carefully, choosing words weighed with decades of reflection, avoidance, and partial understanding. He recounts his own life in measured tones, the path that led him to follow orders, the indoctrination that shaped choices, the fear of dissent. Yet every word is shadowed by the enormity of its consequences. His voice trembles not only with age, but with the recognition of what cannot be undone. The survivor listens with the vigilance of someone who has carried trauma for a lifetime. Each story of obedience and justification is filtered through years of pain, suffering, and the echoes of lost loved ones. Anger rises and falls like tides, but so does a profound need to understand. The survivor seeks not to judge blindly, but to grasp the human dimension behind actions that were anything but human. Silence punctuates the conversation. In those pauses, memories surge, images of barracks, of smoke, of hurried departures and the relentless presence of death. The survivor recalls the fear, the hunger, the constant negotiation with mortality. The former Nazi recalls the efficiency, the duty, the ever-present pressures of conformity. And in these recollections, the gulf between them becomes both more distinct and, paradoxically, more humanly intimate. The encounter unfolds slowly, layered with emotion. At times, the survivor asks questions that pierce directly into conscience. At others, the survivor remains silent, allowing the weight of presence to speak. The former Nazi responds with a mixture of admission, regret, and sometimes defensiveness, revealing the human struggle to reconcile past actions with present understanding. This is not theatrical drama, it is the raw, unfiltered negotiation of memory, responsibility, and the moral questions that have lingered for decades. As the meeting progresses, both men confront the limits of language. How can words convey the depth of suffering, the moral compromise, the betrayal of humanity? How can explanations ever meet the magnitude of loss? They discover that some truths cannot be fully expressed, only acknowledged. Their shared history, the unbearable magnitude of the Holocaust, casts a long shadow over every gesture, every expression, every word. Ultimately, this encounter illustrates the fragile boundary between human capacity for cruelty and resilience. It is a reminder that history is not abstract, it is lived in bodies, in faces, in conversations heavy with meaning. Memory confronts responsibility here, and the audience witnesses the quiet intensity of reconciliation with oneself, if not with another. The moment does not erase the past, but it illuminates it, revealing the complexities, contradictions, and humanity of those who lived through it. This part of the documentary challenges viewers to reflect on the intersections of justice, accountability, and memory. It poses difficult questions without easy answers, emphasizing that history's weight is not measured solely by the events themselves, but by the human stories that continue to live with them. The room is quiet now, the meeting concluded, yet its echoes linger. Forgiveness is not immediate, it is not neat or easily granted. It does not erase what was done, nor does it dissolve the pain that has accumulated over decades. Instead, forgiveness, if it is possible at all, arrives in small, almost imperceptible gestures, an acknowledgement, a moment of eye contact, a breath released after years of tension. In this silence, both the former Nazi and the survivor confront the enormity of what history has placed upon them. Forgiveness after genocide is not a moral obligation, it is a personal reckoning. The Holocaust survivor, though burdened with trauma and memory, understands that forgiveness cannot be demanded. It can only be considered, weighed against justice, memory, and the moral imperative to bear witness. To forgive is not to forget. To forgive is not to absolve. It is, perhaps, a way to reclaim some measure of control over a life that history tried to erase. For the former Nazi, remorse is complex. It is mingled with the instincts of self-preservation, the excuses crafted over a lifetime, and the gradual understanding of what his obedience enabled. He carries guilt, but guilt without comprehension is meaningless. Only when the survivor's presence and questions illuminate the human consequences of his actions does remorse take its true shape, not as abstract shame, but as recognition of irreparable harm. The documentary now turns its lens toward the broader question: what does accountability look like when the passage of time has reshaped both victim and perpetrator? Justice in the courts may have ended, but the moral court of memory remains. Each survivor carries testimony, each perpetrator carries experience and consequence. In this court, no verdict is final, no closure complete, and yet every conversation becomes part of the historical record, a dialogue that preserves memory and challenges future generations. Reconciliation is not synonymous with forgiveness. It is a more elusive, nuanced process, sometimes merely an acknowledgement of shared humanity amid unshared experiences. The survivor and former Nazi may never find peace in the sense of restoration. But in facing each other, in speaking across the chasm of history, they create a space where memory is honored, responsibility is acknowledged, and the lessons of the past resonate with contemporary significance. The final moments of this documentary underscore the enduring impact of witnessing. The camera lingers on expressions, gestures, and silences that speak louder than words. The survivor reflects on the necessity of remembering, not for revenge, not for hatred, but to ensure that society never permits such atrocities to occur again. The former Nazi confronts the lifelong burden of choices made under a system designed to normalize cruelty. Together, they embody the human tension between action and consequence, between suffering and reflection, between history and morality. As the credits approach, the narrative does not offer tidy resolution. Life does not always provide neat conclusions, especially when dealing with crimes against humanity. Yet there is clarity in truth, dignity in witness, and profound weight in memory. The Holocaust is not a distant event confined to textbooks, it is a living history carried by those who endured it and those who enabled it. This final chapter leaves the audience with an enduring question: can forgiveness exist where genocide has left its mark? Perhaps. Or perhaps its true value lies not in absolution, but in the act of remembering, reflecting, and learning. Through this final part, viewers are invited to witness a confrontation with history itself, a confrontation that challenges, unsettles, and ultimately enriches our understanding of morality, memory, and the human condition.